Mundo Holístico, un espacio para tu bienestar integral.
Good morning, buenos días, and welcome to Conciencia Planetaria, a program of Mundo Holístico TV. There's a phrase that I really love, Cultura Cura, culture heals. Across the US and Mexico, people are reconnecting with danza, language, ceremony, and ancestral knowledge, not just as a tradition, but as a way of healing, resisting, and remembering who they are. Today, we're in conversation with two people deeply rooted in this work, one in San Antonio, Texas, and the other in the state of Mexico, not far at all from Teotihuacan. And we're going to be exploring what this movement looks like on both sides of the border and what it's asking of us right now in these very troubled times. So we're joined by Karla Aguilar in San Antonio, Texas. She's a cultural organizer and a ceremonial dancer working at the intersection of cultura and social justice. And Aníbal Alcántara, Becerril, in the state of Mexico, a practitioner and researcher of danza and Nahuatl Toltec knowledge systems. So, let's see. Hola, Karla y Aníbal. Thank you so much
Hi,
for being
Tracy.
here this morning. It's so great to have this space with you. I think I would like to start with a personal story from each of you so that those who are viewing this can get to know you a little bit. So I'd like to know if you'd like to start, Karla, how did danza and cultura come into your life? And how did that shape your path or your sense of purpose? I know you come from a...
Well, it was interesting because the first I'd seen danzantes at a tourism spot in Cancun when I was a teenager, and I was like, that's just for the tourists, and I didn't pay any mind. But I was taken by it for a moment. But then fast forward to me being at the university, and I was doing workshops on neocolonialism using posters from the Beehive Collective to talk about, capitalism's extractive nature within Latin American communities. And at this Mecha conference, some danzantes were there opening up the conference. And, I had my box of materials and posters and was just completely taken by what I felt there, which was people not dancing in very fancy regalia or anything, but that I could feel the prayer, and that feeling is something that just I just stood there and waited for for something else to happen until somebody nudged me and said, Karla, your workshop is next, hurry up. So I went and I went to go set up and give this plática, very brainy kind of plática around neocolonialism. But then after that, I was invited to my first sweat lodge, which again, I was like, sure, why not, right? I had no idea what I was stepping into and how it is that my heart would be pierced wide open, and a journey of seeking would come for me, because I had chosen to leave the Roman Catholic Church at 21 years old, even though I was going to a Catholic university that I chose because I thought that I was going to provide my service to God through the church. And that was something, a vocation, something that I'd had since I was a little girl, that I knew that I wanted to serve God. And fast forward to where we are now, I'm still doing that, but my church is far more vast and wide and deep. And so what started for me as something that was a bridge, a transition point from community organizing, political education, and power building among my peers. Because this was a time of the Iraq War and all of those things that were happening with the Patriot Act and so forth. And so I had to confront some realities for myself that, if I was really going to try and make a change for things, that I needed to go deeper than just educating people about the imperialistic ways of the country that I continue to reside in, and so I transitioned and came into a deeper understanding of what spiritual warfare can look like, because it is a battle that we live in contemporaneously. It is something that has given a deep root and purpose to my journey on this path, that has always been about engaging in a kind of reclamation of our souls, reclamation of our relationship to the land and the spirit of life, that goes far beyond the beautiful aesthetics and superficial things that we see among our practice. And I continue to be a warrior in that sense of being able to utilize the teachings and the practices of our ancestors to help guide me in this work of reclamation and restoration of our peoples.
Wow, Karla, that's very profound. I think, yeah, so the spiritual and the social and the political dimensions are all there in your practice. I think that really shines forth, and yeah, it's very inspiring. And Aníbal, how about you? Would you like to share your journey with the danza and cultura?
Sure. I was introduced to danza when I was probably 9 years old, and it was due to the inclination of my father and my mother in order to somehow being very well rooted into what we are as Mexicans. So my dad was always like telling us that we're more than just charros, that we're more than just revolution, that we're more than just independence, that there's a whole lot of knowledge that somehow it's been clouded by official version of history. So when he found danza, he connected to danza, and obviously we end up there. But I wasn't connected to danza at that age because of a necessity of solving my identity. I was connected because I was totally seduced by the movements, by the beauty, by the art, the ability of moving and expressing and touching people's heart with whatever you were doing in that specific rite, in that specific ritual. So in those terms, I end up falling in love with dance at a very young age, and at a very atomic level, I knew that I was going to do that for the rest of my life. So I was very lucky to find the purpose of my life at a very young age. I'm right there. The guy that is in with the red and white bandana and that little chongo in the head, that's me. And so at the beginning, danza for me was not like this introduction into a tradition that was going to root this identity very well in me. But then I had it. It was a tool that it was there for me when I was very young. For me, it was more like looking for people to, put their hands together because I was dancing nice, because I had a good regalia, because I had feathers. All these healthy ego things that every dancer goes through, I had them at a very young age. But then my dad started asking me, what are you going to do with your life? You cannot just rely on danza. You cannot eat out of danza. You cannot sustain and provide out of danza. So you better start doing something. And that's when I realized that I didn't want to get out of the circle. I didn't want to get out of the atmosphere of this beautiful reality that danza can provide for you. Obviously, because I didn't know. So that's when danza actually started to provide identity to me. But I was already like 19, 18 years old. And then I started traveling to the States, and then to Europe, and then go back to the States, and then Mexico, and then all over the place. So I was very lucky that we were introduced to danza with people that were very, very traditional, very well rooted, and also we were always somehow exposed to people that for some reason, carried this tradition for several generations. So even though I am a first generation dancer, I know also that I've been very lucky to be surrounded by people that is been not only in this tradition, but also in the movement of Mexicanidad, in which I not necessarily took part the way that I wish I had, but I was there. I was witnessing, and I was participating in some things as well. So I think that I was very lucky to grow in surrounded by all of these different influences of not only mestizo but indigenous well-read people. So here I am. I started dancing when I was probably 10 years old. We officially started dancing in our community back in 1986. I was already 11, and I am 50 years old now, about to turn 51, and I'm still dancing. So I guess I'm keeping up my worth.
Wow. So you have 40 years dancing. That's impressive. You must have really had a chance to deepen and become, well, reach levels that most people don't have a chance to reach. And now you've been able to take it all over the world with you. Aníbal,
Yeah.
you live just almost in the shadow of Teotihuacan, not far from there, right?
Yes, my hometown used to be part of the suburbs of Teotihuacan back in ancient times, but also was always a cross of paths. So in at the time in which Teotihuacan fell, it became again another strategic point for people to cross through the lake of Xaltocan, Texcoco, Tenochtitlan, and then go to Teotihuacan, Texcoco, and Tlaxcala. So it's been always here in the middle of everything. And then in colonial times, the haciendas pulqueras needed to cross from here and move their products from here. And then independence as well. So yeah, we've been the suburbs of Teotihuacan since ever.
So you've always had that influence in your life, and in some ways maybe it was a little bit inevitable that you let it touch your heart and move your
Totally
life.
inevitable. Yeah, totally inevitable, because I was born and raised here. And also the passion for the study of history in my family goes back as far as you can imagine, or uncles, or grandpas, or cousins. Everybody shares the stories that our elders always, passed to us. So we know that we got the last name Alcántara in the first massive baptism that happens in the continent back in 1535 in Acolman, which is about 4 kilometers away from here, like what, 2.5 miles away from here. And that's where we get the last name of Alcántara. And then in those years, we were sent to Tecámac to become part of what is used to be called encomenderos, which is like the noble indigenous people in charge of the rest of the community, like a principal. So we know that since always, since ever.
Well, so I'd like to talk about the overall movement of, you mentioned it as Mexicanidad, Aníbal. I've heard it called Mexicayotl,
Mexicayot.
Mexicayot, perdón. I've heard it called by many different names. And so I'd like to hear what each of you are seeing right now. For your part, Karla, in the US, and for your part, Aníbal, in Mexico, how this movement is growing and shifting in each of your communities.
Ladies first.
I by no means do I speak on behalf of an entire movement that is very nuanced and complex and multi-layered. You have, danza that has come into parts of the United States as early as the 50s and 60s, and then in the 70s with other entrances from folks like Maestro Florencio Yescas into the kind of cultural performance work that Aníbal was referencing, that is still, folks are still going to Europe and taking the danza all over the place. And so speaking from, that understanding that there's it's different in California from Florida, from New York or Texas, right? That thanks to maestras and maestros that have understood that, for example, Chicanos here in the southwest part of the United States, that we have a deep root as well, in speaking broadly. I myself am from El Salvador. I'm a migrant that came here and in the early 80s, and also speak from that perspective, that thanks to these maestras and maestros who brought the Chicanos down into Mexico or came into this region to plant groups, much like Maestro Andres Segura Granados, who established multiple groups here in the Southwest, which have particularly nourished my formation and growth to be able to have access to these rituals and way of life, right? What through the 70s, 80s, 90s, the danza has continued to evolve and grow, and I'm of the thinking that the spirits and those ancestors that are in our altars, that are in our instruments, that are those things that we bring forth, that they have a mind of their own. And we may think that we have that folks are picking up, conchas and different velaciones and different rituals as a natural evolution, or that folks are gravitating into the Mexicay or Mexicanidad, or that they carry, this way as, Masehualisli and, a deeper root, right? Like that folks are trying to get down to the substance and to the essence of these practices to the best of their ability. Because a lot of folks can't travel down to Mexico, or elders and maestras can't travel up to the United States with the freedom that maybe they would have 40, 50 years ago. And so there's this interesting flow north south that has always been there, that folks try to create obstacles with by putting these artificial borders and nationalities between us, or that there's so much limited there's such a limited access for folks living in the United States to content that is in English to be able to study, or there's all of these obstacles that folks have to overcome in order to be able to have access to this knowledge and these ways of life. But you know what, Tracy, they're doing it because there's such a need among our generations, whether there's folks that are migrants like myself, or folks that have lived on this side of the border since before the border was invented a couple hundred years ago, that there are people who are seeking to have something to grab onto, something to stand with. And that's very much a part of the human condition. We're living in times where we've known that our different formal institutions, like our different evangelical or Catholic or, formal institution churches, have really failed to give folks the kind of rooting and sustenance and spiritual nourishment that addresses the realities that folks have across our country, right? And so you'll see, I think it's exciting when you see cities like Los Angeles that have a dozen plus grupos that are gathering multiple times a week to hit their drums, to make these movements, to reconnect with the forces of life and those energies of life that have always called to us as human beings, and that we're able to transcend the limitations of socialization or colonization by folks like that. That to me is absolutely fantastic. And in a city like San Antonio, we should have a dozen different danza groups. But here's the layers of the nuance that come in, right? And we talk about where we are today and the critical conversations that we need to continue to have is that danza here in San Antonio is not indigenous to these lands. These are the lands of the Coahuiltecos and the Carrizo Comecrudos and the Lipan-Apaches and Comanches and Caddos and Kiowas and folks that had no relationship to the Nahua Euro-Aztecan, what they called Euro-Aztecan, that kind of culture. And so how do we manage the reality that this kind of practice and way of life is also, for some folks, indigenous folks here in the North, we feel like it's invading their territory as well, because the logic and the tradition of unión, conformidad y conquista is one that, seeks to make room and make space for our practices, but we haven't had the same kind of I think there's a missed opportunity there when we don't from the jump develop relationships with local indigenous communities wherever it is that we are as migrants in this tradition, to be able to land in a place and ask for permission from the indigenous people from those particular locations in order to be able to create that bond, that synergy, that opportunity for mutual understanding. Because as people of the earth and those that seek to protect the spirit of life, we all have a duty and responsibility to figure out how to coexist and support one another in these times, because truly that divide and conquer logic works. It works great. It's worked all over the place, but that's an opportunity that I think we have to be able to look at as danzantes, as practitioners, and those that are, seeking to really deepen ourselves into our own roots, because oftentimes somebody can be from, let's say, Sonora, and they may not have ever had any Mexica, Tenochca, Azteca, anything to do in their bloodlines. But here's this practice, here's this way of life that allows them to be able to pull back the curtain a little bit on the colonized existence that many of us live in, and be able to say, oh, pues sí, the root does run deeper, and maybe I do have other indigenous roots, and maybe I'm not just a mestizo, because here in the missions, mestizos, and because of the caste system, calling yourself a mestizo wasn't, among other indigenous folks, that's an offense, because they claim that you don't know who you are. And that's a whole other question there. But these labels, these titles and whatnot, again, if it serves to divide us instead of having us enter a critical analysis of who we are as a nation, and a nation that has a responsibility to protect the spirit of life, then it's not helpful, it's not useful for us, and we need to figure out how to have those critical conversations internally and vis-a-vis other indigenous communities where it is that we reside on this side of the river.
And Karla, you've been through quite a journey with all of that, because you've worked for many years with the Tapilam Coahuiltecan people. I saw that they have adopted you as part of their tribe, right? And that's a whole journey in itself, right? You have worked very hard to bring those different threads together.
Well, I think it's the ancestors working through me. I gave up on the idea that I was the one calling the shots, and they're just, kind of take me by the hand, and I'm a willing participant, and I give so much honor and respect and praise to the elders of the Tapilam Coahuiltecan Nation and all of the generations since, because I had to come here to understand what real sovereignty, indigenous rooted sovereignty looks like, tastes like, feels like, and the work that it takes to be able to regenerate a community. Because while the mission system had somewhat, when all of these words come to mind, they feign that they civilized the people here, but that's a whole other conversation, right? But that the mission Indians here had been told by anthropologists for generations that they were extinct, that you don't exist anymore. And for those elders that still had the stories from their grandparents, that still knew the rituals and the relationship to the land and to the medicines here, to say, no, you don't get to tell us who we are. We define who we are. We know who we are. And then putting in the work for generations now to be able to restore their community from little embers, from, reestablishing the language, reestablishing their relationships with sacred sites, and the intergenerational work that is happening here has been an absolute inspiration for me to see what is possible when that rooted commitment to reestablish and restore your people, what that looks like. And it may take hundreds of years, but if we don't start now, nobody else is going to come do it for us. And so I had to come and learn all of that here from these families and the Oteca Paguame families that have adopted me in, and the responsibilities that come along with that.
Wow. What a journey you've been on, Karla. That is really such a blessing and such an enseñanza, right? Yeah. Aníbal.
I'm a student.
Sí, as we all are, or should be, if not.
Yeah.
So, Aníbal, would you like to talk a little bit about how you see the movement growing during your lifetime and during your practice in Mexico?
I think that, yeah, I'm sorry.
No, we'll start with Mexico, and then I'd like to know more about both of you and how you've, your travels abroad too, and how you've seen it.
Okay, first of all, as I was growing in danza, in the very beginning, I was more like a performer than a traditional dancer. Even though I was exposed to the traditional ceremonies in the very beginning, I wasn't understanding. I just wanted to dance because I liked it, because I loved it. So when I started to understand the movement of Mexicanidad, was more like when I was already 18, 19 years old, when I started to wonder, what is exactly what I'm doing? What does it mean? Why do we do it? And since when we're doing it? And so on. So I always heard since I was a kid that Mexicanidad was a movement that started back in the 80s, to be precise, back in 1978 in El Zócalo with a few groups that were trying to do practicing. But then I started to study and asking the elders, how was this happening? And the thing is that it's a long process. And that long process, it's also the result of necessities of the society. But more than that, is more like the influences of intellectuals that wanted to somehow, let's say, bring some kind of ideal into the society. Now that I am a little older, now that I see things more like the overview from above, let's say, from outside, instead of just being part of it without not being aware, I realized that this is part of the result of the influences of some intellectuals from Mexico since probably a century or a little more than that. Porfirio Diaz, back in the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, had this group of people known as the científicos. And all of these people were extremely strong influencers into the Mexican culture, per se. And then at the end of the Porfiriato, after the revolution, there was this very well spread narrative or speech about nacionalismo. Nacionalismo was this movement in which they were trying to make Mexicans more patriots somehow, some way. And in order to do that, they were also somehow pushing all of the identities aside, trying to blend them all in just one identity called Mexicanos. And that's where you just need one hero, that's going to be called Temoc. You just need one flag, you just need one indigenous language, is going to be Nahuatl, and then the rest of the indigenous people, we don't care, because we need to have some kind of tag for all of you, and you all look alike. And that's when we started to somehow weakened the identities of the rest of the communities and nations from Mexico, which are a lot, which are so many. So to begin with, this tradition of danza de conquista begins back in 1935. I mean, 1535. We're talking about hundreds of years ago. It's going to be 500 years of this tradition, the way we know it, the way we practice it, the way it's been blended with the Catholic beliefs, along with somehow the baggage of the support of the backup of Mesoamerican beliefs. And it is also the result of a lot of social processes during all these 5 centuries. And then when we face Mexicanidad in the 50s and the 60s with the intelectuales, which is actually the other generation of the científicos, these intelectuales, this generation of people that were very strong influences in the intellectualism of Mexico, they were somehow trying to divide again, conquer and divide. So they tried to separate religion from the tradition. All of that probably has a purpose. All of that probably has a function in order to for us to affect society. First of all, we need to understand that the tradition that we know as danza de conquista was preserved because of the rights that some indigenous people had. The nobles had some kind of rights because they had the titles known as titulo primado. Titulo primado means that you are entitled as a cousin of the king. So if you are, let's say, the son of Moctezuma or the daughter of Nezahualcóyotl, the king of Spain is going to give you a title that is going to give you privileges as if you were their cousin. And that's how this tradition was preserved. Obviously, it went through a lot of struggle as well. I'm not taking the other side of the story apart. I'm not trying to say that it was not part of the process of Mexican identity. But let us also remember that during the 16th and 17th century, castas was something very strong. Castas is this definition. There were more than 16 different definitions of ethnicities, let's call it today, or races back in the day, that the Spaniards did about or made about the identities of people. So you could be Spaniard, you could be Criollo, you could be Mestizo, you could be Mulatto, you could be Chino, you could be Indio, I don't know. But the only way to consider a person a human being is either you were Mestizo, Criollo, or Spanish. Any other than that, if you're not baptized, you have no soul, I can kill you. There's no sin for that. There's no problem. I'm not going to be judged. I'm killing another animal. So since it has no soul and it hasn't meet the commitments with God, then I have no problem with killing anybody. So that was more than anything the actual necessity that the nobles of the indigenous communities or nations, along with the Franciscans, had in common in order to somehow establish a religion that was, in a way, pushing people towards the Catholic ways, but in order trying to preserve the Mesoamerican ways. That struggle, that fight, it's been in our blood, in our genes, since the last 500 years. It is not our fault. We need to start to bring some kind of conciliation for that. And it's not that easy, but also shouldn't be that hard. And in order for indigenous nobles to lose their benefits, land, you need to let him know that he is no longer a noble. So what you need to do is an independence, and you're going to separate the power of church with the power of the government. And now you're going to make a revolution, and now you're going to finally eliminate the power of church as an authority or legal authority, and you're just going to apply the laws of the regular laws that we know today. That's how they start to lose their benefits. There is a saying that goes, no hay pedido en el ejido, Zapata muerto y las tierras se han repartido. In a way, it is for the common campesino, for the common agriculture, means that it shouldn't be a problem anymore. The rich man is being killed and the land is for everybody. It's an easy way to translate it now. There's no literal way to translate it that actually makes better sense. But in the other hand, if you're taking the privilege of the noble of our ancestry, indigenous roots, what you're doing also is that you're losing the land. Yes, you might be bringing land to some of the rest of the community that seems like they wouldn't have it. But in another way, you're taking the land that in big portions the nobles used to keep,
Hmm.
take it. So the independence and the revolution has two main purposes. One of them was to get rid of the Spaniard kingdom. Yes, but the other was to acquire a new patron, a new master. So what is that got to do with Mexicanidad? What is that got to do with danza conchera or danza de conquista? Well, this tradition has been going through all of that and has survived. Why? Because it's very well rooted. And what is that got to do with my exposition? Because I want to give just a little bit of context and how it works. Now, back in the 50s, when no privileges for any of the nobles are no longer valid, I can take away your land. So I need to push the idea that we all are Mexicans. No, you are not Otomi anymore. You're not Zapoteco. You're not Purepecha. You are not Mayan. You're not Cora. You're not Huichol. You're not Yoreme. You're not Raramuri. Let's eliminate all of those tags, all of those labels. That way we only have Mexicas, Mestizos, and that's it. Obviously, the wealth and all of that. So Mexico goes through some kind of racism and classism that was not necessarily rooted the way in which the states had it. We had our own, we had our version, and it was very well done. But when Mexicanidad comes, it tries to separate now the beliefs, which is the actual core of the tradition. So what they were trying to do in Mexicanidad is to separate the Catholic beliefs from the American beliefs. That was more than anything the actual battle. And that's why several of our jefes back in the day were not in agreement with Mexicanidad, even though Mexicanidad started with some jefes from the tradition as well. Why? Because they all were influenced by all these intellectuals that were trying to separate them. So, what is the proper thing to do? To me, there's no proper thing to do. There's no right or wrong. Because if you are questioning your faith, if you're questioning your practices, if you're questioning your tradition, then you know if you need to improve something about it. Then you know if what you're doing is right or wrong. But more than anything, you're understanding the historical processes in which your tradition goes through. So what are you going to do for that tradition not only to survive, but also to improve? You need a very dignifying way to update your practices. You need to open up now because that structure in which the tradition was established in the 16th century in some ways is no longer functional. Yes, the purpose of a tradition is to preserve a knowledge the more, how can we say, genuine you can. Yes, but also is not going to survive in the way in which societies are changing because that shift also is part of the evolution of your tradition. So Mexicanidad does one thing that probably was the intention of these intellectuals that were trying to divide the people in between the tradition in order to now trying to eliminate the actual core of the tradition. And one of those was obviously to eliminate the religious portion of the tradition from the tradition. So they try to avoid velaciones, try to avoid all the praying, all the rezos that were related to Catholicism, and they start to create, to invade, to investigate, some of them, not all of them, to investigate what would be the actual version in Mesoamerican times for what we're doing. But since they have this ideal, this speech, this narrative of nationalism, they were not open for the actual multi-ethnic root that this tradition has.
Mm-hmm.
This tradition was not preserved only by the Mexicas. By fact, they were the last ones. This tradition was preserved by the Otomi, by the Chichimeca, by the Guamare, Jonases, Tepehuanos. This tradition is going actually to be rooted in San Miguel el Grande, which is known today as San Miguel de Allende, Guanajuato. And in 1872, La Reliquia General, which is a portion of these jefes from the tradition, start to do the conquista, and they start to go down south in order to recover the República Indiana, the territories of the Indian people. Yes, And then back in 1876, they established in Querétaro, where there was another few groups of this tradition that they start to do the same. So finally, in 1876, they arrived to Mexico City. So it took them 4 years of establishing different groups all across these territories in order to arrive to Mexico City, planting all this tradition in what is known as Plan de los Volcanes, in the side of Texcoco, Tlaxcala, Puebla, Estado de Mexico, and some regions of Morelos. And in the other side, El Plan de Toluca, which is in the west side of Mexico City in the state of Mexico. Mm-hmm. And then finally reconnect with the jefes that were already doing it in Mexico City back in 1876. So by the year of 1922, the first jefe of danza that shift and changed the regalia, the indumentaria from the concheros, was Gabriel Osorio, and he was the first one to actually offer some dances to what we know today as the Aztec calendar that was not in the museum, because the museum didn't even exist. It was in the back of the cathedral in Mexico City. So those were the first people that started to do what we know today as the Aztecización. I wouldn't know how to translate that into English. Aztecism? I don't know.
Aztecization?
Maybe, yeah. That sounds so.
Yeah. Aníbal, I asked you a very, very big question, but we only have 15 minutes, and I'd like to save some time for talking about other things. So,
go ahead.
I'd like to talk a little bit about, the title of our talk, which is Cultura Cura, and how does danza and the larger cultura serve to heal and to bring back specifically ancestral healing and that decolonialism process. I know that, Karla, you've been heavily involved in that work throughout your career in a multitude of ways.
Yes, and I think that this context that Aníbal just laid out for us is really vital to be able to answer this following question, because we are individuals that live in a historical context. We come to this place as children of grandmothers and grandfathers that prayed a rosary for us, that were so deeply embedded in a monotheistic, patriarchal, separate from nature kind of socialization, to where maybe somebody in our family, like we knew that si la abuelita, pues, she had really hot hands and ella curaba, that our grandmothers and grandfathers may have been shamed out of their culture, may have had it beaten out of them, much like even here, our Chicano elders that talk about, or Coahuilteco elders also that talk about, being beaten for speaking Spanish in the schools here in South Texas. And so you're coming from really dense layers of trauma and being dehumanized in so many ways by the ways that we've been socialized and pitted against one another, creating all of these different classes, as was exemplified by, the casta system, the caste system, which is very much, I would say here in San Antonio, very much alive and well because of the segregationist and the economic polarization that we have here in the city. But if you look at how it is that this cultural exercise, if you want to speak to it in a very broad way, is giving folks an opportunity to be able to have something real and rooted to stand on, that reminds them of so many incredibly powerful teachings, that the danza actually acts as a gateway to, right? I often talk about how for those of us that have been on this path of seeking to have something to walk with in life, that seeking to have a profound spiritual connection, something that we may have had as children, but then maybe we study more and more about the institutions that our families have been indoctrinated into, and we realize that it's not enough, or it's incomplete, or you piece together how it is that all of the harm that has been caused to our societies, and continues, to these days, where, we value more mineral extraction than the protection of water resources, which is the source of life for all people, right? And the rationalizations that we make within like a capitalist kind of environment that we live in. And so when you gather all of those pieces together and you look at these, our human desire to be able to bond, we're pack animals by nature. We're not supposed to be isolated from one another. We have a ton of different ways of being able to connect virtually, what have you, or have all of these communication methods. But the communication that we have between one another in person, or just being out in nature, is something that you don't have to download an app for. It just is. And what I think that the danza offers us is an entry point to be able to return or grab onto or open up within ourselves an inner standing of our relationship to nature. And for those that are beginning their danza journey, I remind folks particularly that if you walk into these spaces and you only have your ayoyotes and your sonajas and your regalia, and that's all you carry with yourself, it's as if you walked into a mansion and you just stayed in the foyer, because our cultures have such a profound wealth of social infrastructure, of order and relationships, and the way that things are related to one another, that is so much more valuable than just the entry point, the little probadita, the tip of the iceberg that we touch on with the danza. And that is, part of my fascination with the learning of the cosmology and the philosophy and the mathematics and the social order of things, because we've been given values and social morality that really ascribes and is rooted in a monotheistic framework that is extractive and exploitative and oppressive. And for folks in our generations that, I don't necessarily, well, ICE is in town, but, I don't necessarily have, somebody that's going to put a sword to my neck for wanting to understand my ancestral roots in this day and age. But now, rather, because of all of the failures of modern society, so-called civilization, that we have a responsibility and a duty to return to those ancestral teachings in order not only for our individual healing and pulling ourselves together again, but that we can offer, as a result of our being whole and whole human beings again, that we can offer something better to our children, those that are coming behind us, and society as a whole. So I think about the concept of land back, which is, something that here in the north that we talk about a great deal, or where in Mexico and other places it's tierra y libertad, right? That ability to be able to be guided by our duties and responsibilities to the land and the spirit of life as our invisible threads that hold us down as human beings. Like, with the climate catastrophe that we're already beginning to taste, with the degradation of our human relationships, this way of life that begins with the danza for some people, or begins with sweat lodges for other people, or begins with something else. Like, it gives us an entry point to be able to deepen our abilities, to be able to come together and bring forth the solutions that our ancestors had already, to a certain extent, already figured out hundreds of years ago, before the invasion. But now we get to come forth and say, hey, we do have solutions for our water difficulties, or how to be able to provide food for one another, or medicine and infrastructure. We have those solutions, and a lot of it is coded within our indigenous sciences. We just need to be able to have enough discipline and personal latitude to believe in ourselves to be able to get there.
Yes, 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 yes. Karla just somehow guided me to some kind of a topic that I was going to go anyways. So she was stealing my words. No, I'm just playing. How does
Yes.
a cultura cura? I love that phrase, and it does. Even though when we were talking about Mexicanidad and how probably at the very beginning was a movement to separate people, at the very end, let us remember that people has intelligence on their own. So when they found Mexicanidad, also they found their own ancestry. When they found Mexicanidad, they also was a way to open up the door so you can find your actual identity, your ethnicity. And that heals you a lot, because if you know who you are, then you know your tools, your cultural tools, your historical tools. And then you can use those tools to approach to a world that seems like there's nothing for you to do but to obey the master in terms of capitalism. So yes, cultura cura in that way. And maybe to me, what danza is about is not necessarily to to function as a band-aid that is going to give you identity for some time. No, but for sure it's going to open up the door, the gate in which you can take a look and say, oh, you know what, now that I remember, my grandma, my grandpa, they were from this region and they used to speak language, and it would be the language, so I can return to my ways. And then you can apply that in your everyday life, in the sense of, okay, I know who I am, I know the greatness of my people, and also I know that if I want to take responsibility for that, historical responsibility, well, then I need to honor my people the way the positive ways in which they were. And also I need to heal all those things that I don't like about myself. And then I start to process that thing. But the most transcendental thing to me, the way in which cultura cura, the way in which danza can be applied, is in the very beginning of what you can call colonization. So you can decolonize yourself through danza. Nope, it's not going to happen if you fight it. It's going to happen when you understand it, when you open up to it. Because then you'll understand that learning Nahuatl from a dozen of sheets is not going to make you more indigenous. But now you have a few words. That's something. But if you get rid of fear, if you get rid of guilt, and if you get rid of pity, then you start to decolonize yourself. Because the second thing that is going to happen when you get rid of those two locks that separate your brain and your heart from your reality is that you're going to establish dialogue with your environment. And then you can understand and finally realize that intelligence is not a human privilege. And then you're going to start to understand that that mountain, that cloud, that wind, that breeze, that bird, that jaguar, they all are somehow communicating and not necessarily telling you specific messages because you need a vision, but they are connecting with everything around them. They're communicating with everything around them. They all are living symbols for you to understand, to read. No, don't expect them to speak Spanish or English. But if they do, don't be afraid of it, you know? And when you establish this dialogue with your environment, and I'm not saying to talk with the concrete, I'm not saying that you can actually talk to a building. But what I'm saying is that when you establish this dialogue, you'll understand why it was necessary for you to believe that there was going to be a hell and heaven. So you can decolonize that. One of the biggest crimes for humankind is to make you believe that if you behave the way I want it, you're going to go to heaven. Why don't you take the heaven that you already have right here, right now? Why don't you enjoy that heaven right now? Why don't you take responsibility for the hell that you sometimes can cause right here, right now, and be responsible for that? So you get rid of fear, and you can only get rid of fear with curiosity, with knowledge. Get rid of that. And then you can trade guilt with justice. You know what? Let's be responsible. I did something wrong. I can fix it. And then get rid of pity. You know what? Put of this, put of that, put of him, put of her. No. We all have chances. And if I can bring a hand to somebody, there it is. You know, get up and let's continue walking. And if I can't, it's okay. And if I need a hand sometimes, I'll get the hand of anybody, and being thankful for that, because at the end, human nature, human condition is association. So dancer brings that very beginning portion of healing when it comes to associate with people. Do not expect dancers to be perfect human beings. Do not expect dancers to be the Dalai Lama. They all go through their own BS. They all go through their own processes. And in those processes, they're going to affect you. But yes, they all are going for the same purpose, finding some kind of cure, finding some kind of healing. And it works. And then you're going to understand, okay, danza was not for me, but I've been having a great time understanding myself. So I can honor these ways, but I'm going to go for what I actually meant to do, which is maybe I am peyotero because my roots are coras or huicholes. Or maybe I am temascalero because I come from places where they used to sweat. So if danza opens up that door for you, and danza opens up that necessity for you to analyze, to criticize everything that you learn, then it's functioning. But if you end up again fanatic, then it's again your colonial mind working. So just make it work for you somehow. It takes a lot of how can we say, effort, a lot of struggle, a lot of self-commitment. You need to question that to yourself every day. I remember that once one of my friends told me, "Do you ever wonder if you want to be a dancer today?" And I was like, I get up every day. I wake up in the morning and I'm like, yes, I want to be a dancer again. I want to be a dancer today. Maybe I'm not dancing with the drum and with my rattle and with my feathers, but I'm dancing with my people. I'm dancing with my family. I'm dancing. I'm being in harmony with them. And if I am in harmony with them, I can be in harmony with everybody else. So that's for now. That's gonna be it because I won't take forever.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for that, Aníbal. I think, you know, the thing that you talked about there with the dialogue with the environment, with the nature spirits that are around us. Both of you have talked about this in such a profound and beautiful way. I wish we had another hour. There's so much more to talk about. I feel like
we haven't even gotten to the whole Salvadoran connection.
We've only gotten to the first renglón, no, of our questions, but sadly our time is ending up. So we're just going to have to continue this conversation in other ways. And I guess if I can just ask each of you, it's actually our time is up. But if each of you could just give me a very short final message, I think we can take that time.
Aníbal, you can be brief. Go ahead.
First of all, I'm very honored. I've been having these conversations with Chicanos and Mexicanos in the States since 1993, 1994, the first time that I got there. So I know that back in those days, I was no guidance at all for any of this. But now I understand a lot. And also I understand a lot of the Chicano realities, the Chicano social processes. And I'm very thankful that I was always very well taken care of by these people. And also, if there's anything that I can say is that we shouldn't take long to eliminate this idea of a border. I know there's going to be soldiers, so don't cross a border like that. I'm saying that we need to start to educate our people, not only our own people as Mexicanos or as Chicanos or as Latinos. I don't like to say the word Latino, but maybe as indigenous people. But one thing would be like, let's start to eliminate that idea of borders. The other thing that we need to understand as well is let's build up a better way of understanding respect. I think that the whole global process of evaluating the moral structure that is happening right now in the entire planet is going to lead us to understand that respect is the very foundation of the human condition of association. So we need to establish, to start to share the ideals of what should be the respect for the following 2,000 years. How can we respect each other? How can we establish harmony with everybody else? You know, we better start attacking in that field. That is going to be something that I really want to propose. And the other thing is that don't expect, how do you say congruencia? Congruency?
Congruency.
Congruency.
Mm-hmm.
Don't expect congruency from danza practitioners. They are as human as you. They go through their own traumas just the way you do. They go through their own realities the way you do, their pains, their whatever you want to call it. But better than that, try to understand why you are identifying in that moment with that person in that way. And then you can see things with a much more peaceful way. And well, thank you for everything. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aníbal.
We've got 2 minutes, Karla.
So I will be brief. I will say, again, thank you. Thank you, Tracy. We love having these conversations. These are the things that we chop it up about, all the time. This is something that has been like some of the invisible threads of my journey of life. I strongly believe that we're the ones that we've been waiting for. We don't have to wait to ask for permission from anyone to assume responsibility over our lives and our destinies as individual people. And that when we begin to knock on those doors and ask for that guidance, it comes. And the more that we can have faith and love in ourselves individually, like that is the most revolutionary thing that can be offered. And, earlier this morning, I was thinking about how it is that, one of the strongest and most beautiful things that we can offer as practitioners is to spark that imagination, spark that memory among people whenever it is that they hear the drum or they smell the copal or something there that resonates with them in their spirit, that it can be a chispa or like a pebble in the windshield to bring folks along. Then that's where it starts, even if it's something real light and simple. That there is something really, really beautiful that can be seated in a person. And so big shout out and love and respect to all of our danzantes and practitioners from coast to coast to coast, that we may continue to find inspiration and love and goodness and strength and fortitude in our practices to be more unified and be able to withstand and overcome rather all of the different challenges that we're facing as a broader community at this time.
So profound and so relevant and valid for our times. I thank both of you so much. And my prayer is that the seeds that have been planted in this conversation today will grow into something beautiful. And the conversation will continue in many ways and many platforms as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you to your producers as well.
Thank you.
Yes. Gracias, Nacho. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye. Talk soon.
All right.